We now have a quorum. So a very warm good morning to the Hearings and Engagement Committee on the 16th of February. It's just past 9:32, and so we'll get underway. I have a couple of apologies. I have apologies from Councillor McPherson and Hamilton, both on council business. I have apologies for partial attendance from Mayor Southgate, Councillor Naru Ralph, who are both on council business, and from Councillor Pascoe. I note Mai Ollie will need to leave us at about 11:30, and he's on standby for some other urgent stuff, so he may need to pop out. I'm just noting that. So with those apologies, I ask, are there any additional apologies? I note Councillor Gallagher has joined us, so a very warm welcome. So with those apologies, I'll move. Councillor Donovan will second. All those in favour say aye. Those against, the ayes have it. Colleagues, the agenda, I'll move the agenda. I just want to confirm if everybody could please update the diligent, synchronise it, because that will give you an updated running sheet, because we've had a couple of submitters withdraw and we've moved everybody up. So with that update, I'll move. Councillor Donovan will second. All those in favour say aye.
Mr. Chair, just so is that the running sheet we got sent at 9:23 by email? That's the most current one.
Yes, it is, Mark.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
No problem. All right. So we've just got a couple of housekeeping matters before we open up to hear from our submitters today. The first one is the confirmation of the Hearings and Engagement Committee open minutes of the 2nd of November. Councillor Donovan has moved. Councillor Gallagher has seconded. No discussion there. I'll move it. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against, the ayes have it. We did. Yeah, we did confirm the agenda. It was moved by Councillor... in fact, I moved it and seconded by Councillor Donovan. All right. Item 5, confirmation of the Hearings and Engagement Committee open minutes of the 4th of November. Can I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Gallagher, seconded by Councillor Donovan. Thank you. All those in favour say aye.
No.
Those against, the ayes have it. Right. So that now brings us to item 6, the hearings report, the review of the naming of roads, open spaces, and council facility policy. The purpose of the meeting here today is simply to hear from submitters, and then at the end of hearing from submitters, we'll have an opportunity for elected members to ask staff for anything else they would like to see or hear as part of the deliberations when we send this item back to my good friend Councillor Bunty's committee in community. Right. Who's that? Sorry. Right. Before I open it to the public hearing, Sandra, Sandra Mari is with us. Sandra, do you want to make any introductory comments prior to us opening up to hear from the submitters?
Grant Kettle will provide an opening comment.
Mr. Kettle, a very warm welcome. Always good to see you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So, councillors, obviously the purpose today is to hear from submitters in regards to the review of the naming of road and open spaces in council facilities policy. Just the one thing, just in terms of, I just wanted to share in terms of just clarification around the one point around the consultation process. So I think just in looking at the submissions and analysing those submissions with Sandra, I think it's just important to understand what the proposal is asking for. And I think it was just a point of clarity just in terms of the 12 weeks over the development cycle. And I just wanted to make the point in the sense that when we're talking about a development cycle, we are talking about a cycle of approximately 2 to 3 years in terms of that, the subdivision. And that is in the context of the 12 weeks. And the other point I just wanted to quickly just make in terms of the 12 weeks and the reason for that 12 change to 12 weeks, or the proposal for the 12 weeks, is in relation to the governance and also the structures of iwi in regards to the process that must be undertaken, in my view, in terms of going through a selection of a name. And based on my past experience and obviously a decade worth working with iwi and in a iwi governance and management position, it's important that those go through governance structures in order for the naming or the choosing of names or a pool of names. So just wanted to put that a bit of clarity around that in terms of the purpose for that. In terms of that, Chair, we're in your hands in terms of how you wish to conduct that.
Thanks, Grant, for that introduction. Thank you. I'm happy now to proceed to start hearing from submitters. I have Roger Stratford. Roger, a warm welcome. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. We have your written submission. Often best to just identify the salient points and retain some time to take questions from elected members. Roger, the floor is yours. Roger, I think you're still on mute. Your mic is red, so if you alter that. That's perfect. Roger, we can now hear you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I oppose the naming of roads policy. Points for my submission. I want to encourage mana whenua developers themselves, rather than see them as separate from the development community. I notice just anecdotally, there's a fascination for Maori of Englishness as distinct from Pākehā. We only have to turn on the Maori TV station program listing for evidence of that. So with mana whenua developers, they can put forward their own culturally appropriate names for the streets, for the roads. Bringing in this naming of roads policy will frustrate development of roads. And we've got Her Worship the Mayor on the social media has promoted heavily on the housing bill to promote new housing developments. How are we going to be able to do this if there's going to be endless delays on building new roads because of this naming policy? If developers are going to have to consult endlessly and expecting more changes in the future, why are we having this change now? We've already got a bill which we need time to appreciate the current legislation, the current bill, which is, before it sounds to be satisfactory, these are only a few tweaks. We need more time to appreciate what the current policy. I know that the academic community on the submissions, people like Neville Robertson and Paul Flanagan, actually support the naming of roads policy. I just asked them this question: how far are we going to go with correcting what Pākehā have done, alleged to have done over the Treaty of Ki Tiriti o Waitangi? How far are we going to take all of this? Because I think that it's quite fair to just allow the current policy to continue and also appreciate it more and to get it working. If there are other ways to do this other than these, these outlandish sort of provisions to sort of force Mana Whenua to propose a name. When in ethnic groups among the submitters actually have a similar view to my own, have their own view on race. I fully support Maori becoming developers themselves and putting forward names and bringing race relations forward to correct treaty provisions, make treaty provisions to come to the full fore. I think I'd better stop here and now ask any councillors if you have any questions on my submission.
Thanks, Roger. I see Councillor Mark up first and
Thank you,
Manga Tapora afterwards. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. Good to see you, Roger, and thank you for your submission. Roger, the very first point you made I was a little bit unclear on, and that was you were talking about tangata whenua or mana whenua and developers. Was it getting together or mana whenua as developers? Can you maybe go over that point again for me, please? I got a wee bit lost in the translation there.
Certainly, Councillor Mark. What I was suggesting is that Maori need to become developers themselves, in essence, so that we can have Maori groups who are in on with the Mana Whenua community.
Oh, okay.
The assumption that I believe that you as a council are making is that the developer community consists solely of one group of Pākehā who are out to make a profit. And I don't believe that necessarily needs to be the case.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm not entirely in agreement, but that's not the place to talk about that. But thank you, Roger. I just needed some clarity on that. Cheers, mate.
You're welcome.
Manga Tapora.
Thank you, Chair. Morena, Roger, kia ora to you. I firstly just want to acknowledge your use of the Waikato Tainui method of spelling with your double vowels. I really commend you for that. My question was, you just mentioned before that there were other ways to do this, and I wondered if you could enlighten us on what other ways you would put forward.
I believe that communication would be the best way of eliciting these sorts of these objectives, and posting out on a media which Mana Whenua are most likely to be responsive, rather than just putting them in their notices section at the back of the newspaper. They could send them the communication of preference. They can, whether it's email or postal or text or a phone, just friendly phone call to get some of the leaders of the Maori community together and have some sort of spokesperson within the Maori community who is up to speed with the development community. That's all I can think of at present. I'm sure there must be many other suggestions. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
I don't have any other questions. Roger, thank you for your submission. So the next speaker I have is Isaac Smith. I'm hoping to see you come up on the screen. Isaac, are you there?
Yep, can you hear me?
I can hear you. We can't see you currently.
Hang on. There we go.
Kia ora. Morena, welcome. Isaac, you've got 5 minutes. We've got your written submission. Please try to leave a little bit of time for questions. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay. Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Sakaira Tawhaiti Smith, also known as Isaac Te Amo Te Rangi Smith. And thank you for hearing my submission for this policy consultation review on renaming roads in Hamilton. In the state of Maryland of the United States of America in the early 1800s, a black slave was given the honor of having a mountain named after him as he fought gallantly for the US Army against a hostile enemy force. Now, the mountain was not named after his own name, but after how white Americans viewed him in their day. So the mountain was called Negro Mountain. Although not a big deal in those times, it is in these times, as that word is a put down to African Americans today. So in 2019, the Maryland State Highway Administration not only changed the name of the mountain, but removed all road signs that read Negro Mountain. They said, and I quote, "It's unacceptable and does not reflect what Maryland as a state is today or how we are as a country." Also, locals living around the area and visitors of different ethnicities and backgrounds that like to climb the mountain had said that it made them very uncomfortable using the N word when referring to the mountain. And so I come before you all today to tell you that Bryce Street, named after John Bryce, Gray Street, named after George Gray, Von Temsky Street, named after Gustavus Von Temsky, and Cameron Road, named after Duncan Cameron, make me very uncomfortable. Firstly, as a human being. Secondly, as tangata whenua. These men that I have named are not the type of men that should have streets named after them in the city. These men have been found out to be mass murderers and terrorists of men, women, and children in their homes and on their lands. These men were party to rape, murder, drug-taking, arson, and executing a scorched earth policy to genocide the Māori race. In no way should our Hamilton streets be reflective of these brutal crimes against humanity. We are now living in the year 2022. What was deemed okay in the past when putting these names to roads and streets in this city and across the country is definitely not okay now. We have come too far in race relations in Aotearoa to perpetuate the memory of these tragic events by being reminded every day as I and other Māori drive down these streets. Even Hamilton, named after John Fane Hamilton, does not belong here. The guy did not even set foot in the Waikato. Like him and the other names previously mentioned, they had come to New Zealand to exterminate Māori. So the council has two options. Remove the street signs that do not reflect the New Zealand we live in today, or run the risk of being tarnished with the legacy of these types of characters and their murderous deeds on your hands. Be on the right side of history and have your conscience set free. Kia ora.
Right, I have two questions so far from Councillor Mark Bunting first and then Deputy Mayor Jeff Taylor.
Kia ora, Isaac. Thank you very much. Have I pronounced your name right? Is it Isaac?
Isaac.
Isaac. Kia ora. Thank you for your very moving submission. It was very clear. Your local hapu are you local, or where's your ancestry?
I whakapapa te Tainui, yes.
Kia ora. Okay. Are there, and I'm certainly not mischief making by this, and I'm genuinely trying to find out, are there Māori place names that are equally as offensive to you as local iwi?
Well, not that I know of. And most Māori place names were named after a rangatira or a great deed that someone had done, or a reminder of an event that happened in the past.
Right. I'm thinking with specific reference to Kuti Park, for example. There's no reference to Te Rauparaha, obviously, because he wasn't enormously popular around these parts. And I'm just wondering where that rolls if we extend this to its proper conclusion.
What do you mean by that?
Oh, well, I'm assuming if we adhere to Te Tiriti, as we're all trying to do,
Right.
do we have localised importance, or do we have Māori versus non-Māori importance? I guess that's what I'm trying to work through. Does that make sense?
Well, here I see it. The British Crown sent their people here to, I guess, enact their wishes on how they wanted to take New Zealand. So they sent men here to exterminate Māori. And so the thing is, there's no bearing on what the significant Māori names are. That's got nothing to do with it. By right, tangata whenua can name whatever they name because they were the first peoples of this nation. It is the British Crown that come here and imposed themselves and their people and wanted to immortalise the deeds that they did that actually murdered children. You know they murdered children. You know today, if you're found out to be a murderer of a child, that is the most heinous thing. But back then, it was okay because it was a big superpower that came in and tried to overrun this country. So the facts are the facts. There's no getting around it. You know what they did, what was not cool, and it doesn't fit in today's society.
Cool. I'd like to extend the offer out for a coffee with you so I can learn some more from you, if that's all right.
Yeah, cool. All
Of
good.
course. Thank you. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Deputy Mayor.
No questions now, thanks, Chair.
Right, thank you, Isaac. I have no other questions. Thanks for your submission.
Kia ora.
Next up is Waramu Puki. Welcome. Kia ora. Morena. Floor's yours.
Kia ora, Ewan. It's good to see you again. Ngā mihi o te kia o koutou katoa, te committee whakahaere o te kairigero kirikiriro. As per my submission, I outlined some suggestions in terms of helping the committee get their head around some of the processes around how traditional Māori place names were selected or could be selected. In doing so, being a descendant of Wairere, or the ancestor, the prominent ancestor that lived on this land originally, or which the imprint of the city is now built on. As outlined in my submission, we wanted to suggest a process around linking Wairere Drive with related whakapapa names from Wairere himself. He's recorded as having 5 wives, lucky man, but he had numerous descendants as well. And those numerous descendants actually occupied different parts of what is now the city. And and some of them actually intermarried and formulated alliances with neighbouring hapu as well. A lot of that detail was actually recorded in the Ngā Tapu Wai o Hutu Mauia report of 2003 to the Hamilton City Council, which was written at the time to help give the... so it's been able to help us revive those ancestral names that are not known nowadays to this current generation. Every geographic feature on our land was actually named from a gully to a creek to a ridge, walking tracks, pass sites, burial grounds, burial caves, canoe landing sites, swamps, you name it. Excuse the pun. There we've got well over 500 plus ancestral names in our archives that we'd like to revive over a period of time. But in terms of engagement process, what we follow is the direct descendants of those particular ancestors who last lived on the lands before the land confiscation of 1863 and get them engaged in that discussion. Now, it's like a former landowner that might have had his or her land taken off them by the Crown, and then retracing who that landowner was. That's what it boils down to. So that's the process around it. And as per my submission, Hamilton City is the only city in New Zealand that has its main major ring road, arterial route, named after its mana whenua. The other I think my submission is pretty well self-explanatory in terms of how we feel about others coming into our area and bringing names with them that have no context. Most of this has happened largely since 2012. And names like Kurikuri Park, Te Hapuri, Whānau Street, Wairua Street, Mana Street. I mean, these are ridiculous names that really just don't even, I think that's an indication that whoever putting those names forward don't actually know the history of that land. And that's an affront to us as Mother Whenua. And if there are offensive Māori names, those particular names since then have been very offensive to us. And I think also there's a kind of a narrative out there of having what is called a so-called contemporary history. No, that's revisionist. That's a revisionist view. We insist on evidence. We insist on having documentation that actually proves the the history of that land, and particularly from the evidence of the Māori Land Court. So, yeah, I'm open to further questions from the council in terms of if they would like some further clarification. So that's my point at the moment. So I also want to add that whilst we are a kingitanga hapu, our history did not begin with kingitanga. Our history goes back centuries, and so. Suggestions around naming roads of the city after the figureheads of the kingitanga, I mean, they need to be named in context, largely in Ngaruawahia, or Huntly, or Morrinsville. So, because none of those figureheads actually lived in Kirikiriroa at all. So, and that's the point I would like to make. Kia ora tātou.
Wiramu, thank you for your submission. I have two questions currently. Mangai Tapora, followed by Councillor Mark Bunting. Mangai Tapora.
Thank you, Chair. Ngā mihi nunui ki a koe o tēnei ata i te rangatira Wiramu, pai ki te kite e a koe. Thank you for your very thorough submission on this kaupapa. My pātai is a little to the side because I think you've been very clear in both your oral and your written submission. Reading through a number of the submissions, there's a lot of those that are talking about where they fit into the place in terms of the city has multiple cultures and this is not to detract from Ngāti Wairere as well. I'm trying to understand the Ngāti Wairere view of how we manaaki other whānau into this process, or is that something?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Kia ora te pora. Really, the manaakitanga aspect of it is sharing that history with others who are not from here. I mean, we are the Aki Kāwa of this land. And a number of many of the schools in the city are now coming to us and wanting to know a bit more of the history of the land of which their schools stand on. Rotatuna was a great example, Te Tōtara Primary, and now eventually citywide because the Ministry of Education is now insisting more direct involvement with local hapu in terms of our history. That is great. And we welcome that robust discussion around its history. It doesn't have to be a contentious subject. It's really around approaching these matters intelligently, having good evidence to front up with that says, well, actually, this is what the records that were recorded at the time. It talks about this ancestor that lived on this land, and how and what is the narrative around his actual or her actual direct ancestry. And then down to the living descendant. It's really about just having that further conversation around understanding what our city land is about. What was it like in pre-European times, before even humans arrived? Because there are place names that are very, very old. like Te Papanui, for example, Te Nihi, which is Hamilton East. Those are ancient names that even predate the arrival of the Tairiwaka. And that richness of history, I think our city would be better for it, and many others as well. Kia ora te pora.
Ia mihi.
Thank you, Tapora, for the question. Councillor Mark, I had Councillor Sarah there, but her hand went up and went down again, so I'm assuming she changed her mind, although she's allowed to. She's wearing my favourite colour, yellow, so that's good. Councillor Mark.
It's mine too, school bike.
I'm conscious I'm kind of dominating questions a little bit here, but I'm finding this really interesting and really positive. Ngāmihi nui, Winamu, it's great to see you. Would you support some form of blueprint or some form of overlay for Kirikiriroa? So people actually, you alluded to it, the richness of history here, it just is untold. Would you support us doing that kind of work and putting a blanket over the entire place so that people actually knew before they, even developers, anybody actually knew? Like, for example, conversations we've had that Te Rapa is actually up by the hospital. I mean, who knew that sort of stuff? Would you support that kind of work or want to be involved?
Absolutely. Actually, I've had discussions with Professor Bruce Clarkson and Professor David Lowe on the idea of it, to actually have a geographic map that brings out those place names.
Yep.
I'd like to also acknowledge the recent passing of my uncle Hakupapuki, Hari's brother, but also it's now fallen into my aunt, Heke Tarangi Broadhurst, and myself. And my father Hari did say that in the time, that it is time that our story, our place names need to be shared. And also, absolutely, I think a blueprint or a GIS map of our features, but we do need council help to do that, because many of our creeks are actually piped, and we've got an approximate idea where they are, but finding those particular features again gives us a better indication on how to revive those names.
And to be clear, you're not talking about turning everything back the way it was, but you're talking about just manakitanga was the word you were using before, isn't it? Just acknowledgement of the history. Interesting.
Yeah, and I mean there's a great opportunity to engage our community in the gully restoration projects like Bradfield Park. Yeah. We could have Te Wai o Taheke, which is the old name for that gully, which was also the discovery in 1924 of the largest greenstone adze in existence, which measures, which is in the Auckland Museum. And to have that taonga returned back to our city. It's the largest in the world, and was actually unearthed there by a farmer, which I'm currently have just found living in Wellington, his grandson. And so I'm in dialogue with him to see if we could develop a repatriation case to have their tuki returned to our city.
Right. Okay.
Yep. So yes, there's opportunity for that conversation.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Chair, for your indulgence. I'll try and shush now.
Thanks. Is that an undertaking, or is it for a prolonged period?
An undertaking to try.
Okay. No, thank you. I think we were all hopeful there for a fleeting moment.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Thanks, Councillor Bunting. I have a question from my good friend, Councillor Gallagher.
Thank you. Very incisive and insightful. Lance Vavord, our current Chief Executive, but when he was in charge of the community section, Parks and Gardens, Maria Barry and others, we've been talking about, for example, there's lots of parks, green spaces and features that have a name, but 99%, including our own staff, and I say that respectfully, don't have much of an idea as to where the name came from. And I've been in a case we'll say, well, actually that was a former councillor in 1922 named after. But where my question, I guess, is leading is what Lance and the council, I think, is hopefully talking about is that every sort of feature at least explains the name it currently has, so people get that historical context. But what you were saying, and I think this is the crucial thing, is that if you like, the underlying, the appropriate Maori name is also there as well to explain the totality of the history of that particular geographical features. Is that really what you're saying? And I guess that in some ways is leading us in some cases to dual names. We have an existing name, but obviously you would be looking at the ancestral name as well.
Yeah. In the Ngā Tapu Waihotu Mauia report of 2003, which the Council has in its database, we identified key reserves along the river and had used the name that we know of that location, and so people could get a context like for example, Duck Island, as people call it, Te Mautere Koi Pico. So in that report, we have aligned what we know of those old names with the existing park. So you already have a template there to go by. And that was very forward thinking on the part of us at the time. And we didn't want to put people's backs up that suddenly this name change was happening. It's really just giving an idea about history is history. And all is that it was timely, that people had a context of, Te Totara is actually the name for this particular area. So from the best we could at the time, we wanted to have, people can actually understand that yes, there is a Māori history, a hapu history, and a particular whānau history of those areas which is important to them. And there were some Pākehā, I just want to say, that were very close with Ngāti Wairere, who spoke Māori, who interacted with my great-grandparents and my grandfather, who were conversant in Te Reo Māori, and those Pākehā families and their descendants are still, those narratives and connections with them are equally important to us, despite the pain of the land confiscation at the time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gallagher. Councillor Sarah, we are going on a little bit, but we have made good time, so I'm going to continue to take a few more questions. I've got Councillor Sarah and then Councillor Maxine.
Thank you, Chair Ewan, for your generosity there. I have come back with a question now. Kia ora waramu, thank you very much for your presentation and answers so far. Just following on from Mark and the idea around this blueprint, creating a blueprint, I guess another submitter has raised concerns around what's been proposed with having a mana whenua provide a pool of names for an area because that doesn't really align with the tikanga of gifting a name and also ensuring that the name is appropriate for that particular location. I'm just keen to hear your thoughts on that particular part of the proposed process at the moment.
I suppose that any robust process is really driven by whakapapa, Sarah, and direct whakapapa of those particular key ancestors, as I alluded to. And it's really up to those direct descendants to have a say first. And our approach is to support those particular descendants in that discussion process, not take away from them their right to choose what ancestor they want to be commemorated for. Just say, take for example where the base is. That's in Ngāti Kora land, and where the hospital in Melville generally is now, and around the lake. What we would do is that if they were descendants of these two particular prominent ancestors who lost their land at the time, Te Wetene Rore and Here Te One Tapu, what we would do is actually go to their living descendants and ask them, would you be okay to revive these ancestral names that reconnects you back to your whakapapa, to that area? Most times they will say yes, because They understand that they're being approached respectfully. They have seen the documentation that makes them comfortable with being able to make that decision. And secondly, that it brings them back to have a say, to be connected again. Despite the land was taken under Raupatu, it gives them a chance to have a say in that process. They do it on the basis of trust, and they do it on the basis of familiarity, because actually many of them actually know who I am. So I really get them to make the decision, and what we do is just give them the evidence to support them.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Wiramu. So I guess I'm not sure if it fully answered my question, but
okay, yeah, that's good. I'd like to answer it the best, so you can come away with it.
It was just in the policy at the moment is saying, okay, developers, you go to mana whenua and ask for a pool of names for a particular area. So then that's kind of then the developer would be potentially picking and choosing from a group of names. And I'm just wondering whether that you have any thoughts around that part of the proposed process at the moment.
I can tell you where it's gone wrong, because what's happened now is that we've got contemporary street Māori names appearing in Rotorua and out of Rotorua, which absolutely makes no sense to us. And that's the problem. We are engaging with people who don't know that history. And they're just a tick a box, or to bring their place names from their own hapu area onto our land. In my submission, I highlighted that disrespect, sadly, to us as Yaki Ka. So it's really about, as I mentioned, that if there are names to be put forward, really, it really comes back to Ngāti Wairere. And then what we do is that we would seek the support of the other hapus, that if they support the process of bringing back correct tupuna names, not just randomly pull any name out of the air, and that will do and suffice to just tick the box.
Okay, thank you, Wiramu. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Councillor Sarah. Although we take great pride in this committee being the most engaging committee, we are now running a high risk of also running late, which I hate. But I will take one more question from Councillor Max, and then we will be moving on. Councillor Maxine.
Kia ora, and thank you, Wiramu, for your submission. And it does create quite a lot of thought. Part of the proposal for change was a 12-week opportunity for developers to engage early with mana whenua to be able to have a better understanding and to be better educated about place names, appropriate naming. Do you believe that that is an adequate process? And if not, what might be needed to make it so?
I believe sitting down with them in an environment where they don't have to feel scared or frightened off about history. And then, actually, I found when I was engaged by council, by Ngā Manatopi at the time, and dealing with developers, it is a bit of a mixology bag. Some of them don't want to have names, and some do. And the ones who did understood basically where we were coming from. We weren't trying to, we were trying to find at least a reasonable outcome in terms of if it's a reserve that's getting contributed to, if a reserve has been set aside, what we looked for was some of the features that were associated with traditional Māori occupation there as well, or ecological value. It's really about, having that conversation with developers. I'm happy to, look, I've always been comfortable in that space to talk with them anyway. And a great example of an outcome like that is the naming of the road after my dad, Hare. That was done during his tangi, when Ian Patton rang me and Tristan Jones. And so I'm grateful now that there were some developers who weren't afraid to come and talk to me, or to Ngāti Wairere. But once we sat down and shared the history and how much value history names can bring, it really can enrich an area. Rotorua School, High School, is benefiting from that immensely now.
Just further from that, and I understand your indulgence, Chair, Councillor Mark talked about a blueprint. If that were something that was well consulted on and held the history that you talk about, could that, do you believe that that's a good way for us to introduce those types of names, areas, understanding to developers at a very early point rather than at the very end of a long development process?
Absolutely. Tamaki Makaurau in Auckland has a map that shows its geographic landmarks. I think it's time that we had ours. I suppose the interesting politics that will come out of that will come from my neighbouring whanaunga, hapu, over that matter. But at the end of the day, the city council boundary is a small imprint within the traditional hapu boundary as we understand it. But the process here is really about honouring that history respectfully and moving forward. And I just want to add, when Hare was alive, we witnessed the signing of the apology by Her Majesty the Queen in Government House in 1997 in Wellington, when Te Ariki Nui and the Queen, Her Majesty the Queen, actually sat down and discussed this apology. That signing of that official apology was the means of healing and going forward. So that history, the time is that we've always been ready for it, and we have been in that area now since the 90s. We just continue the good work.
All right, thank you, Waramu. That was very helpful. Unfortunately, we now have run out of time, and we need to move forward.
Okay.
Donald Turner, I think we have you. Kia ora, welcome. Donald, I understand that you've been joined by a number of others. Mahana is one. I'll let you make those introductions if I could, Donald. You've got 10 minutes. Could I ask you to focus on your salient points? We have your submission. As you can see, my council colleagues have lots of questions. Donald, the floor is turned over to you.
Kia ora, Chair, Wilson and councillors, e mihi ana kia koutou. And just like to start off with, korangi nui e tui honei ko papatuanuku e takoto nei. Tātou nā hunga ki wainga nui kia hiri ana kia rātou koe mene te ki te pō. Nā pani nā pauru nā rawa kore ki ngi tū hei tia pō tatau te whero te tuawhitu o te ki tōna whare. Kia tātou e tau nei tēnā koutou. So just acknowledging us that are all here today and present. So thank you for this opportunity. If I could start by a context, councillors. And the context is the pandemic, and a question about how would Hamilton City Council meet the needs of its multicultural stakeholder and Crown Treaty partner? That's a question. I have a solution, or we have a position, and we think by reviewing its policies to ensure they are current, relevant, transformational, and aspirational for all. How would we do that? Would be about creating opportunity for all parties, treaty partner, Hamilton City councillors, and representatives to be a part of a framework that actually sits to discuss and review its current policies together. So that's the context I'm wanting to put us in, and I'm aware that you will all know that context. And I take it that submission's been read, and I think I've gone through the other submissions, and the pandemic space and the policy review really creates an opportunity for a reset. So my question is, are we ready for a reset and how we might do things differently? And it's good to see the whanaunga in here off the back of what Wiremu Puke was saying, because in a lot of our submission, that's what we're wanting to ensure and understand, that we create and work together to enhance and to understand that thread of our history, not only from the past, currently, but also moving forward into the future. And so that's where the front end of this context is being put before us. And I think that from a Waikato Tainui point of view, if we were to look and review our policy, current policy, to see that it is reflective, current, transformational and aspirational for all, then that's a really good start. So I take it that you would have read it and you would have seen a lot of the positions which talks about review, how we might look at working this together, moving forward within its current structures, and us sitting at the table, be at the decision-making table rather than a receiving advice table, and then making a decision together as stakeholders, but also as a treaty partner. I think I'd like to leave it there to see if you have any questions.
All right, Donald, thank you. I'm looking to see if there are any questions from my colleagues. Manga Tapora has a question. You've got the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Ngamhine nui anō kia koe e Don.
Kia ora.
Ko koe anō mahana. I think the kōrero that we've been having this morning has been really great, because it's largely talking about bringing together all of our people. And I love, Don, that you've talked about being a thread in the wider part of the framework. I wondered if you could, ko koe ko mahana, talk to us more about what you see in the framework and how we would pull that all together. We had Roger Stratford on this morning, and asked him about what are the other ways in that we could do this. And he was talking about communication and themes and objectives, and using other ways instead of notices and papers and things like that. And there's lots of different perspectives, as you've read in the in all of the submissions. How do we do that? I'm looking for some practical advice that we can take and our staff can take on board as well.
Kia ora, mahana, you can feel free to jump in. I think practically, currently with the current policy, it's probably about having people from those different mana whenua, to create the framework, to bring it to the committee that sits to make the decision and be a part of that criteria development of the policy in a practical sense. Then we review, we understand, and then we go through the process that we need to go through. I think one of the, a powerful position is about educating and making people aware to alleviate fears of whatever. And that needs to occur through discussion and kōrero. And that discussion and kōrero needs to happen in an equal playing field where we're sitting as equals. And I sort of refer back to the process we went through with Māngai for the elections. And what it highlighted for me was actually having somebody actually at the table, and there could be that question about treaty partner rather than and stakeholders. What does that framework look like? I'm bringing this point here for us to consider. because it's not an easy position for our councillors who are elected representatives of the communities. And so I acknowledge the work that you guys are doing and what you have to move forward and consider. And I'm also considering the relationship as a treaty partner. And how do we work that? And I think a practical example is by sitting at the right table, having the right discussions that are aspirational and that we give understanding to each other's questions that may come up. Mahana, if you'd like to, anything else you might have?
Donald, could I ask you to introduce Mahana and any other speaker you have, just so we have the context?
Kia ora, Chair. So Mahana from Waikato Tainui, he's one of our lead workers as well, an expert in this field. Kia ora, Mahana.
Thank you.
Kia ora, tēnā tātou, e te kaunihira, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koe māngai te pora, mo tō pātai. Yeah, I support Don's whakaaro there. I think, you know, example, and Weremu touched on it around that GIS system. And I think, you know, just that alone, you know, if we have this working, you know, I guess the practical side of it, if there's a working group put in place, you know, we can go around to our whānau and ask the question, you know, and seek, you know, certain names for particular areas. But I guess, you know, if they're, so instead of going around and saying, oh, look, what's the name for this area? What's the name for that area? We can actually give them a heads up and say, look, if in the future when we change names, there's a possibility that we can use those names for those different areas. And I think that's been an ongoing thing for our people, is that we're handing things over but don't know what they're for. So I guess if we, you know, have this in place, that it's clear for the people to say, all right, these are the possibilities, or these are the, I guess, opportunities that we can have when we hand over these things in the future. And I think another main one too is the time frames. Like, you know, I guess 10 working days. That, you know, a lot of our people are scattered everywhere, and 10 working days isn't enough. You know, I guess with the people as well is there's a process that they need to go through. You know, they're not just going to one uncle or two uncle. There's a process, you know, where they got to go through their marae, and then they have to have a, you know, I guess a hui with the rest of the hapu, just to find, you know, come up with some names. So I guess, you know, with the time frames, if we can push that out as well. But I guess this will all come when we sit down around the table to talk about and have a wānanga about this strategy moving forward. Kia ora.
And so, if I think about he pau manawa order, because you mentioned it in the submission as well, it's been put out amongst what we've been proposing as well. Would a step towards the framework be a step towards giving effect to he pau manawa order, in your view?
Yeah, kia ora te pora. I must acknowledge the mahi actually that has been done from the council with regards to supporting in the past and till now, and collecting data to inform decisions going forward. To your question, Māngai te pora, yes.
That's it for questions. Unfortunately, we're now running out of time. We're now 15 minutes late. I will take one brief one from Sarah. Sarah, if you can just make it brief, just one question, please.
Okay, very brief.
Directly to whoever you want to respond.
Kia ora Mahana. My question is, just a clarification, are you, I guess, supportive of the idea then of kind of proactively creating a blueprint, a map of areas of significance, and kind of using that first to then guide things like this policy processes around naming.
Yeah, yes. But I guess, we've got to bring the people together and then we can have that, I guess, that bigger wānanga around it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Nice to see you, Donald. See you at the next Huia meeting.
Kia ora, thank you.
Right, our last submitted today, Kerry from Community Waikato. Sorry, we're running a little late. A warm welcome. We have 10 minutes allocated. Please leave some time for questions. Kia ora, welcome. You have the floor.
Kia ora. Me kau ana ki tō tātou minita, nāna anō tō tātou rā I tūwhara I te karakia. I nā kupurangi Māori e me nā kupu manaaki o te atua. Tēnā rāua koe. E me kau ana ki tō tātou kingi tuheitia te pauherenga waka, te pauherenga tangata. Me te kāhui ari ki tonu, pai mārere. Kia Ngāti Wairere, tēnā koutou. Ki tō tātou koromatua, mea Paula Southgate. Tēnā koe e te māreikura. Ki nā kai kaunihera, me nā kai taki o te pau manawa ora, nei rā te mihi. Ko Ngāti Taratukuri, ko Ngāti Tamatera, ko Ngāti Pāwa, ko Ngāti Awa, te whakatōhia nā hononga, ko kiri karua hau no Community Waikato. Thank you for the chance to speak to our submission. Unfortunately, Holly Snape was an LCE, was unable to make it today, and has asked that I speak on her behalf. Overall, Community Waikato believes that Hamilton City Council has developed a good policy. This is a small but significant area of work of Kirikiri Roa, remembering the pre-European occupation of this land. This policy is also another positive step that builds on the Council's unanimous decision to have a Māori ward from the next local body election. Community Waikato believes that as He Pau Manawa Ora rightfully recognises developers in Aotearoa New Zealand profit from the development of lands taken from tangata whenua at the point of a gun or stroke of a pen. While using names does nothing to restore the injustice of our history, it doesn't further invisibilise the people of the land. In the words of Honiana Love, CEO of Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision New Zealand Audiovisual Archives, as names have been lost to the landscape, our presence was lost to the landscape. Nor should we use the names of the tools of oppression to further exacerbate the mamae, such as reclaiming of the name Fu Korokoro rather than Miranda. The Miranda was a colonial gunship that bombed and destroyed a Ngāti Pāwa power site in 1863 while whānau were gathered. This is not the ongoing naming legacy Community Waikato wants to see in the future of Aotearoa. The timing aspect raised in this policy, and I heard the previous speaker, is also positive, although I do support that we stretch it out, and I also support that Council consider the blueprint that was suggested. It just means that consulting with developers that consult with tangata whenua, or should consult with tangata whenua and mana whenua, early rather than an afterthought. We also expect that Māori will be appropriately resourced to participate in this process. Finally, we are confident that while most developers will be supportive of applying Māori names, others will not. As they are the owners, they clearly have the last say. However, I would suggest Council monitors the number of developers that choose the Māori offerings and those that don't. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this. Thank you to the Council for proposing this policy in the first place. It feels positive progress, and we congratulate the Council for considering the value of these kinds of discussions and the resulting policies. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa, I rongo I e rā whakaaro. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you for your submission. I open the floor for questions. I don't have any questions from the floor. Again, thank you for your submission today. Really appreciate it. Colleagues, we now move to where staff require or seek direction from members as to what further information based on submissions, verbal and written. So it's given that we've all read the written submissions, that they would like to have included in the deliberations report that will be presented to Councillor Mark Bunting's committee on the 2nd of March. Just checking, Sandra or Grant, do you have anything you would like to add prior to me opening it up for councillors to provide feedback as part of what they need in the deliberation report?
I will just add a small comment about in context. I think it's important to understand where this policy started from, because some of the submitters are suggesting something which is quite a long way from the start point. At the moment, the naming of roads in particular is quite developer focused. The developers have quite a large say in the naming of roads. Some of the submitters are suggesting quite a move quite a long way from that to a committee process where developers would have a much smaller say. So that is that because that's quite a large difference between those two positions. It would be good to get direction on the committee's view of who should be involved. Part of that decision is that at the moment the policy does not explicitly state that road names in particular are in any way linked to the history of that place. There is currently no direction there to staff that is the preference, while there is conditions, criteria that staff look at around that. Historically, names have often been unlinked to history. So when you view road naming as being, this is about describing the history of a place as being a very important aspect of it, you sort of come to a different end point than if you go, a name is just a name and it can be sort of more broadly viewed. So direction on the weighting for the history would be helpful as well. So those two things together would send us in different directions as to what is wanted. The other thing to keep in mind is that the submitters have very eloquently put forward different ways that we could do it. Those things have not been consulted on. That does not mean we cannot put them in the deliberations report as options for you to consider. But if you are wanting us to put that sort of information, other options in front of you like that, then some direction around that would also be helpful. Grant, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you for that, Sandra. Right, so I have a speaking order. It will be Councillor Bunting, Mayor Paula, Councillor Sarah, Councillor Angela, and then I have Councillor Gallagher. That's the way it's come up in order, and that's the way I will handle it. So, Councillor Mark.
Thank you, Chair. You and I appreciate that. Sandra and Grant, you've seen a bit of a move, and you've heard a lot of discussion about this blueprint idea, which would take time. I would like to know, in your report, please, the implications of not necessarily making any change in the meantime until we go back to the table and entertain something like the blueprint. Does it have to be done now? Hello?
Did you want an answer to that now?
If you could give us a rough answer and then put the implications in your report, that'd be great.
I suppose there's actually three options there, just to clarify. There's keep the original policy and then do further work. There is keep the proposed policy and then do further work before the next policy review, or to just pause the current policy review and then do more work.
Okay. Great.
Which one were you sort of thinking of?
I'm probably thinking of the third at this point. because I think there's some really positive stuff coming out, and and some really interesting ideas, both from Tainui, from Wiramu, and even from Roger Stratford. So I personally, I'm in favour of the pause, but that's really for the committee to decide at the time.
All right, thanks, Mark.
Thanks,
Mayor
Ewan.
Paula?
Appreciate it.
Good morning, everyone. Just a question for extra information when we come to make the final decision, just some clarity about how it lines up with Hei Po Manawa Ora. I know we haven't quite 100% landed the action plan for that. That's work in progress. But I take on board that that's our definitive leadership document around aspects of Māori in the city, and I do think it shouldn't be inconsistent, so I just need to see where it dovetails in and where it doesn't. I don't need an answer for that now, though. In terms of understanding historic place names and so forth, I like the idea of creating some kind of register rather than, something to draw upon rather than relying on a pool of names one by one for roads kind of thing. So, so I think that makes sense, and it probably expedites time a little bit. Plus it gives a richer kind of background to the whys and wherefores of each decision that might shape developers to think more favourably towards a Māori option. I don't, however, favour anything that adds a lot more time to the development consent process. The more work we can do ahead of time so that we can lean on that, the better, because there are enough impediments to speedy development as it is without adding another one to it. So it should be kind of seamless. So that's what I'll be looking for in the solution. I'm probably leaning towards the proposed while continuing to do work, because I think if we pause altogether, though I could be wrong, if we pause altogether, we'll still be defaulting to the existing policy while the pause is on, right? That's so correct, it wouldn't really be a pause. It would be business as usual while we think a bit more. So I'm probably in the camp of a progressive, positive step forward that the proposal is, without committing to anything other than to look into the detail a bit further over time. Inconsistency with the Hei Po Manawa Ora, but look, I'm still forming. I was interested in hearing today, so I'm still forming my view.
All right, thanks, Mayor Paula. I have Councillor Sarah, followed by Councillor Angela, followed by Councillor Gallagher, followed by Manga Tapora.
Thank you, Chair. I think from reading some of these submissions today and listening to the kōrero today, I think our process maybe hasn't been quite right in terms of needing to have that framework and blueprint first, and then that I really like the idea of taking a wider view of the city and our future growth areas, marking out those areas of significance and telling those stories and getting that in place first, and then having that framework in place to guide the naming of places. And I think we also need to kind of be looking at this policy in the context of how we were facilitating real engagement between mana whenua and developers, because I'd really rather see positive outcomes around naming and things come from that rather than kind of being forced through the policy, because I don't really think that the policy is the right place to be pushing for those outcomes in some ways. So a little bit of a change of heart around and to some extent, but I just think we should be focusing on that other area first. So I would like to see us look at the option of probably pausing and then working some stuff through first before progressing things, or at least and having, I'm open to the idea of progressing with this policy, but I'm a bit worried around the comments that particularly Waikato Tainui made around it not really aligning with tikanga, where we're asking for suggestions of names to go into a pool, whereas the correct process is to gift a name. And so I'm a bit concerned that by just pushing through with this, we're really just, it's not progressive, it's just the wrong thing. So, and I'm just looking at my notes. I guess that's probably the key thing there. The other thing I think is in Peacock, they already have a cultural blueprint that they're working on, which is already a live example. And apparently in Ruakura, there's also already a live example of mana whenua and working with developer to kind of come up with a theme, which is innovation and education for the naming of the area, and then base the naming on that. So there's already live examples, and I think we need to create this policy in the context of the successful examples that are already out there. Hopefully that makes sense. So bringing together the existing growth teams and things and marrying it together.
Thanks, Councillor Sarah. Councillor Angela, followed by Councillor Gallagher.
Thanks, Chair, and I'm aware we're not in debate time at the moment. Staff, I would like some commentary in the report just around a bit more clarity between the current policy, which has a list of general procedures that anyone applying to rename or name a road or open space must comply with, which is still identity, historical significance, cultural significance, etc. So I'd just like some commentary between the current policy and what is being proposed, because the majority of submitters wanted the current policy to remain for all sorts of reasons. So I just want to understand the variations and the different outcomes between what we've got now and what we're proposing. And the second, I would like to understand a process. I agree with the previous comments made by members that we're not quite ready yet. And I think, and I have said, try not to debate here, I have said this in the past, that we're trying to apply a very Pākehā process. And I think Sarah articulated that quite well just before with Peacock and Ruakura. So I just want to understand a way forward if we do pause this, because I don't think we're quite ready yet. That's what I'd like to see in the report. That was not debate. Thanks, Chair.
I think you navigated that very well, Councillor Angela. You may want to send lessons to some of your colleagues.
I will.
Councillor Gallagher, followed by Tapora.
No, thank you. And I know I'm totally respected for my conciseness at all times. Can I just, from my point of view, the really high level and the aspiration is we live in a city community that has 300-400 years of human habitation, as I understand it, and the intent of the policy ultimately is to acknowledge the totality of our human history, a la you go to other countries where I think some countries, particularly actually in the UK, Ireland, do this very well. It's the getting there, and I'm going to be listening very closely to Tapora in terms of her own, not just Tapora, but obviously I think she has certain insights that I am going to listen incredibly closely to for obvious reasons in terms of this feedback to staff. The one thing, and I very much valued Tainui and also Wiramu's submissions, number 23 in the Tainui submission, and this is one that I do want our staff team to respond specifically to. As a JMA partner, we expect the Council to engage directly with us to co-design the recommended naming frameworks, decision matrix and resourcing for mana whenua, and to consider how they may deliver mana enhancing outcomes for all people in the future. So I just want to, if you like, in terms of our Hipe Mana Ora pillars of wellbeing, zero in on the partnership aspect. That's number one. Number two, however, excuse me, is I think Mayor Paula alluded to the fact we have to be also very careful that we have a do-nothing strategy at this time, because obviously we have an existing subset, and if we're not careful, we won't make progress, if you take my point. So I think we have to have change, all right? We have to have change, and it's a matter of whether it's the complete ideal change now, which takes some time, or whether we have some, if you like, refinements on the journey, all right? Because if we have status quo, then there's nothing to guarantee that we don't have names, Flagstaff, Chartwell, you name it, that have no or very little cognizance. So that'd be my input, if you like. But again, they say good things take time, and I would, if you like, rather the good things take time approach, with the caveat that we do need to make, I think, some 1 or 2 urgent changes in terms of our engagement with developers.
Thank you, Councillor Gallagher. You'll have to pay a small fee to Mainland Cheese for those references. I'm going to take Manga Tapora next, then I'm going to call a 10-minute comfort stop. I have Councillor Maxine on the list. I'm assuming there's going to be some debate as well, so that's why I think I'm going to call a comfort break after Manga Tapora. Manga Tapora, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. No pressure there, Councillor Gallagher. At a high level, this is not debating, taking points from Angela. This, at a high level, this is about really bringing people together. And we've heard that in the submission. So on that note, I agree with both Angela and Sarah around just taking a wee bit of a pause and reflecting back on the submissions. It'd be good to get information on what the blueprints and frameworks that the submitters have talked about, and what sort of time. I think it'd be good to get really good information on that, and by that I mean what sort of timeframes are we looking at? What's the cost around pulling together the framework, and what it would take to give effect to that framework? That's the sort of detail that I'm hoping to come back to us, and also with the blueprint as well. I might leave it there, Chair, because I'm going to wade into debate. But I think the points are very clear around what I'd like staff to bring back.
Yeah, look, I think that's correct. Manga Tapora, thank you. It's now 5 minutes to 11. Let's come back at 5 minutes past 11. Just gives us...
Yeah, look, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I wonder if you'd just allow me just to ask a question. Then we can finish that part of the process and then move into perhaps debate afterwards.
All right.
Would that be agreeable to you?
Always happy to cooperate with my good friend, Councillor Maxine. Maxine, you've got the floor.
Oh, thank you. It just it seemed to make a bit of sense to finish the questioning and then move into the next part of the meeting process. But of course, this is your meeting to run. I took all the last comments of Māngai Tapora. During his submission, Weramu talked about a previous report in 2013 that was commissioned or given to council, and it would be useful that not necessarily need to be in the report, but certainly if that could be located and circulated, perhaps there is some useful information in there that can help us with further deliberations, etc. What I would like to see in the report are any implications of cost, etc. that may be if we were to work down the lines of a bit more of a consultative process in the blueprint or database of names, etc., and also the implication of what time might need to be taken in order to do that. So that's it from me for now. Thank you.
We're still here. Oh.
Sorry, Councillor Mark, yes, that was my fault. I switched off the mic. Let's now take a 10-minute break and come back just before 10 past 11, and we can then have the debate. All right? So we'll call a halt until 10 past 11. Cheers. Sorry for being it's exactly 2 and a bit minutes late. Right. So, councillors, just to make sure, are there no other questions? No? Good. So what I am going to do is refer us now to page 12 of Diligent, which is the staff recommendation. I'm going to move that. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Donovan, thank you, my loyal deputy. I have been advised by governance that staff have raised some concerns as to some of the nature of the feedback from elected members, just in terms of staff's capability of being able to make those additions to the report in time for the 3rd of March. So now that at least we've got the motion on the table, I'm going to give chance to staff to make any comments, and then I'll open it up for debate.
Thank you. Sandra Murray here. I'll just put some additions there. Yes, I did note that some of the requests around costing out and providing some indication of implications and feasibility, for example, around the blueprint or map of names, and also around the setting up of an alternative consultation. Just to note that at the moment, the consultation between developers and iwi is between developers and iwi. It is not a council facilitated process, and they to cost out what it would take to involve council in that process will take some time as well. The reports for the meeting on the 3rd of March are due today, and so there will not be time to do that additional work. So we would need to push that date out to a bit later on in order to do that work.
Look, I wonder whether or not, rather than require staff to do all of that work, if we're not best to, at least with what they can add to the report, that is added, and it does go back to the community committee on the 3rd of March, and that the community committee then chooses to have a motion or amendments or foreshadowed amendments if additional stuff is required, and that the committee gets to vote on that on the basis of being mindful of time implications and cost. I mean, clearly, I would prefer to keep this process moving forward. Our role at this committee is to hear the evidence, hear the feedback, enable staff to try to put forward a meaningful report. But the substantial matters need to be debated at the full committee under the guidance of the chair, Bunting. Mark, does that seem a pragmatic approach?
Perfect, and I think you hit the nail on the head, mate. There's no point in doing extra work now and then maybe having to do extra work afterwards. Right. So, no, I'm 100% in support of what you're saying.
All right, thank you for that. Now, Councillor Angela, am I just checking, was that little hand up for a question, or were you just really quick off the line for the debate?
I was super quick.
Good job.
For debate.
All right, so on that basis, the motion is moved on page 12 by myself and Councillor Donovan. We're opening it up for, there are no questions, we're now opening it up for debate, and Councillor Angela is first.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, very aware that this is not deliberations or decisions, so the debate is only on the submissions and the process and the report to date. Look, I want to thank staff for the work that has happened on this. It hasn't been an easy process, but what I have gained from the written submissions, and of course we need to be cognizant of it's not just whom we heard from today, it is all of those written submissions, that I think there is work to do. So I am looking forward to what the report will bring, and I think Chair, you've outlined that the Chair of Community will move us towards that. And I think that the one thing that all of the submitters and the written submissions had was that there is a wide variety of views on how we should progress moving forward in naming roads and open spaces, etc. So appreciate the analysis report. Thank you, staff. I think you've, as always, done a really great job there. And yeah, I look forward to deliberations on the in a new way forward, as Chair Bunting will no doubt lead us to on the 3rd of March. Thanks, Chair.
You're very welcome. I have Councillor Bunting. And you're muted.
There we go. Thank you, Chair Ewan. And look, first of all, can I compliment you on the way you've chaired this meeting? I think you've unearthed some really great, respectful and interesting discussion, and you've got us all thinking, and that's the sign of great chairing. So well done to you.
Oh, thank you.
There were some really interesting perspectives today, and Councillor Angela makes a good point that sometimes we can get guided by those we hear, and we do have to have a really good look at those who have written down stuff as well. Yeah, and I'm excited about it now, really, really excited that we've got a quite an interesting way forward that could be quite revolutionary, making us, if you like, the cultural leaders in this country. We've got a really, really great opportunity by having some really good kōrero. At this point, I have an open mind, but at this point, I'm swaying towards taking a pause and making this even better, looking at a blueprint, or to give credit where credit's due. I'd be keen to think about naming it the Gallagher Green print, because it was really Martin that first came up with this idea publicly. So credit where credit is due. I was interested in some of Wiramu's comments versus Tainui's comments. You could see a little bit of differences of opinions. Even Wiramu was saying that some of the Māori names we've got are in the wrong place. They seem to be a bit of a lottery at this point. So I want to have a good close look at that. I'm going to go and have a really good look at what we've done with peacocks, just sort of quietly been under the radar, as Sarah pointed out. They've made it a really good cultural plan for the street naming there. So we're going to have a look at that, because half of our work might be done already. I also wouldn't worry. I don't think the Gallagher Green print necessarily needs to be a hugely expensive exercise. We have people volunteering their services and their information all over the place. And I think if we get snappy with it, potentially we could get the museum staff to lead the thing. We could already have the resource there. But I think if we have that green print there to start with, then there's not going to be a lot for us to actually worry about. But then I think we do the policy after that. So that's my thinking at the moment. But thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Mark. Mangai Tapora.
Thank you, Chair. Really love the feedback this morning. It's a bit of a shame, because I note too that there were a number of written submissions that indicated they wanted to be verbal submissions as well. So it would have been really good to have heard from those ones as well. Having gone through all the submissions and keeping an open mind in terms of outcomes, what we actually talked about today, I concur with Mark, as a bit of a way forward in terms of how we bring whole communities together and the whole city together to understand the shared history, which is the point that I was raising around He Pou Manawa Order, and how we've got He Pou Manawa Order, and it now needs to be fleshed out a bit more. And this is a huge opportunity for us to be able to do that. Support the pause. Just noting Sandra's comments before, I think we can even get a high level steer around the blueprints and frameworks And in a practical sense, that is really going for what we call a hikoi. To go for a walk around, let's hear things, let's document it. I think there's a real practical solution to what is being asked around the blueprint and the framework as well. I will say the framework though, and I was quite happy to hear from Waikato Tainui that that framework encompasses everybody. It's all inclusive, and I think we need to keep that in mind with our open minds. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Māngai Te Pōra. I have Councillor Sarah next.
Thank you, Chair Ewan. I may have already strayed into debate earlier today, so I'll keep it brief. But just to say thank you to staff for the work that you've done to date. And also to everyone who has submitted. I found it incredibly valuable reading and listening to the submissions. I think what I've taken from those submissions is we do need to take a step back and look at the wider picture, look at where this policy sits in terms of the bigger context, because what we're looking for ultimately is an outcome where we're telling the shared history of Kirikiriroa, within the names that we give to our street names and places. So how do we actually influence that from the very beginning and be proactive? And so I'm really keen to look into those ideas that have been raised around the blueprint, around a map of significant events and people and stories. And that's that can be a really inclusive and exciting exercise, I think, where we're telling stories from all over our community. So I look forward to the debate coming to the community committee, but very keen to really take our time, a little bit more time to get this right. So open-minded, obviously, but keen for those options to come to us. Thanks.
I love a committee with so many open minds. Right, I have my good friend, Councillor Martin.
Yeah, I particularly want to acknowledge Māngai Te Pōra, but also I will deeply value any insight that Māngai Oli gives us, purely also being aware of his previous role in this council in terms of the communities that he has historically worked with. And why I allude to both Māngai Te Pōra and Māngai Oli is I'm aware that in life you go in various rooms, you have a various subset of experiences and knowledge. And in my case, dare I say it, in terms of the history of the region and country in which I have been living for many years, I'm still on an absolute learning journey. And I thank a number of people who I won't name here today who assisted me on that. If I have a vision, and I don't want to repeat what should be said at the community committee, is that, as an older person, I can walk around this city that's had 300, 400, 500 years of human habitation, and I can visit a park or a geographic gully or a geographical space and have some descriptor board or app on the phone that gives me the totality of the history, of the human history of that area, and the name will be appropriate. And that doesn't obliterate anyone from that. So obviously, if we have things like Sanford Park or Sealy Gully, they obviously stay because they're acknowledging a person in our history, but it's not necessarily the only name. What is crucial in the descriptor board is that we all, because I think if we did an exercise today and we asked ourselves and staff to take all of the names of all of our gullies and parks and say, who is that park named after? What is the history of the naming of that particular park? I think we might be rushing across to the New Zealand History Room, to the History Room at the library very quickly. So I'm looking forward to the, if you like, bear with me, the bigger exercise in a journey that actually understands the history. For various reasons, I prefer the word green print to blueprint. Green print is a much nicer descriptive, I think, what we're trying to do. And I just make the point that I can't wait for where we do have street names that still cause pain and contention. If we're not yet ready to change those names, then at least let's get the history board up and explain why those names cause pain and contention, because I don't think we should overestimate the historical awareness, myself included, of the people of the city in terms of that history with the journey we've been. I mean, I'm still learning a heap. So I will, I think, be supporting the next way forward. I think you're quite correct in your judgment, Mr. Chair, that this matter is now for the Community Committee, that our task is done. All we've done today is heard the submissions, but basically this is now in the court of Mark Bunting's Community Committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Martin. My good friend, Mangai, I was about to call you Councillor Ollie, maybe premature. Mangai, Ollie?
Thank you, Chair. You and yes, very, very premature on that one. Look, I was going to sit this one out, but given Councillor Gallagher's nice comments, I thought I would just provide some input, some comment. I guess I think it's great that here Paumanawa Order is, is heavily involved in this, and it's about telling the rich history of our city. I am mindful about history and who is telling their version of it, with a view of how long that storytelling may take to determine that richness of that history. So my natural inclination of policy is to crack on and get it done so we can give it effect on the ground, but I'm aware of the need to go through this journey. So I'm just mindful and listening to staff, I'm just mindful how long that blueprint may take to make it robust and valid so it can be given effect within the policy. That's what I've got to say at this stage.
Thanks, Mangai. Ollie, I've got Deputy Mayor Jeff.
Thanks, Chair Ewan. Yeah, look, I wasn't going to speak either, but Councillor Gallagher somehow persuaded me to. Yeah, look, I'm obviously supportive of the staff recommendations today, and obviously the substantive debate will take place at Mark's committee. And I think we've learned a bit from the submissions, and indeed from today's discussion I've found particularly valuable, has added some clarity to my thinking. There are a variety of views expressed in the submissions, suggestions of special forums being set up, whereas my view is that likely to be at the committee is likely to be that the conversation should always be between developers and iwi, without too many other groups trampling through it. The blueprint idea is, I think, good, and I think other cities are using this sort of thing, and I'm not too worried about how long it would take, because I just see it as something that would evolve, and it would be a picture slowly coming together, and you would work with what you had at the time and that sort of thing. And I think that the earlier you get this information available so it can be acknowledged and understood, the more likely you are to have names that are accurate and meaningful. And also the more likely I think you are to have take-up. And by having take-up, you avoid compulsion. And that's certainly primary thought in my mind. Yeah, good session, and looking forward to the debate. Thanks.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Followed by Mayor Paula. You'll have to unmute, Your Worship.
Sorry, I thought I did. I clicked on it. Didn't click hard enough. Sorry about that. It's actually been a very interesting morning, and to hear the submitters, but also to read the many, 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 many more written submissions that we received as well through the process. I'm really pleased that people take the time to submit their views. I think, as I alluded to before, I'm interested in exploring a register or database of historic names and historic resources that developers and others can dip into and use rather than a case-by-case basis. I think that will be a useful way forward. I know we're having another meeting shortly about Hei Po Manawa Ora and the implementation of that, so I'm looking for that consistency with the direction of Hei Po Manawa Ora that has had the buy-in of iwi and hapu. I'm interested in measuring what we do, and I know that to date we've had really good data about the progress and numbers of Māori street names being much higher in new areas than they are in older areas of the city. That's a good sign. It shows that, in fact, developers are already in some ways embracing the ability to tell stories through their place names, which is really good and positive. I support a cooperative approach. Remember that I think I'm agreeing with Jeff in this point that we want them to buy in heart and soul for the right reasons, rather than anything that might slow them down or make them feel resentful about the way forward. And I think we can achieve that, to be honest. I really do. And I think then it will be the positive energy that some of the submitters have already noted today, give or take a few suggestions for change. I do concern myself with the time of process before developers. We need to, it's not their everyday work. They're getting along with building and developing the city. So we need to make it as easy as possible for them to access the information they need to make good decisions. And so I go back to the idea of having predetermined some areas, historic area names, some stories, and relying on iwi and hapu and thork and so on to help us in that journey is important, because I think it'll be a time saver in the long run. So I look forward to seeing what the report says in respect to those matters.
Thank you, Mayor Paula. I have no other questions, no other councillors requesting debating rights, in which case I will now put the motion that is on the table, which is as per page 12, moved by myself and seconded by the Deputy Chair. All those in favour say aye. Those against say no.
So the motion is carried unanimously.
Colleagues, that brings to an end the meeting today, the Hearings and Engagement Committee meeting of the 16th of February. Thank you for your participation. One final comment. Whoever held the chair previous to me in the chamber, I have bad news. Your Wellington Roasted Supreme Coffee Dark Chocolate that was in the drawer has been found and has now been consumed. And can I say...
It's a part of being in the in bubble.
It doesn't sound like mine at all, but...
Oh, it's mine, Ewan. It's mine.
Well, can I say it was very, very good, and clearly it was left for the next chair, and this chair appreciates it.
Pay it forward. Look forward to seeing what's in next time.
Oh, it was chocolate, wasn't it? It was chocolate, not coffee. Could have been mine.
Yeah,
Enjoy
Wellington
it.
Roasted Supreme Coffee Dark Chocolate.
Yeah, chocolate's made to be shared.
Thanks, cheers. Great job. Thank you.
Cheers, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
Thanks, Ian. Good job.
Thanks.